Welcome to Insights. I'm Dick Goldberg. We've probably all done it, saying something to a person of color that comes off badly, culturally insensitive. My guess, even minority persons talking to another person of a different minority have blundered. While there's a myriad of workshops for mental health professionals, lawyers, managers on assisting them in being more culturally sensitive and more skilled in this communication, the rest of us could use some help too. With us today are two such leaders of these groups. Monika Gutkowska, she is a psychologist and a staff member at the University of Wisconsin Health Services, and Monika grew up in Poland. Also with us is Amanda Ngola, who's a clinical social worker here at the University of Wisconsin. Amanda is biracial, and she's experienced a lot of times of negotiating this as she's grown up and throughout her life, and she counsels students of very cultural backgrounds at the university. Together, they lead a multicultural seminar to graduate psychology students, and thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Why don't we begin with the issue of multicultural? In the opening, I talked about people of color and minorities. Do those things mean anything different, or are they interchangeable?
I think that using the term people of color is more of a universal term, maybe more of a current term. I think minorities, it started to imply people of color or other types of minorities. But I think in the terms of race, in many parts of the world and even in the United States, minorities isn't an accurate term because they're not, people of color aren't numerical minorities. So I think people of color is more of a...
Who isn't included in minorities that would be included in people of color?
Well, minorities could be a sexual minority, it could be a person of color, it could be,
Gender minority.
Gender.
So let's say a sexual minority. Let's say you're talking about someone who's gay. Is that not a person of color then?
Yes, that's a totally different identity.
So wouldn't we want to be talking about minorities because that's a bigger canvas and offending minorities?
We could be talking about minorities if that's
well, that's what I meant to be
talk
talking about. So people of color refers to people who are black, brown, yellow, whatever. I don't know if I'm being politically
in terms of
now.
race. I think in terms of race, it would classify those.
But I'm talking about those kind of dumb things we say to someone, go, oh my God, I wish I hadn't said that, or you didn't know you were saying something that was insensitive. Mm-hmm. So if you're willing, I'd like to be talking about minorities then, the broader picture.
Okay.
Okay, that's not what you signed on for, but I think it would be useful.
Okay.
Okay. Why don't we jump into some of the most common mistakes people make when they're talking to a person different from them, a minority. I'll lead off with one that I've, as a Jewish guy, I've received. Gee, one of my best friends is Jewish. You ever heard that one before?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a good point because maybe we can talk about intent, right, versus impact.
Okay.
So when we say one of my best friends is Jewish, Asian, Black, Polish, whatever, we mean to connect. We mean to say, hey, I know who you are, I know, your group, and I want to connect, and I don't have any prejudice. But the impact of that is quite opposite, right? Because in reality, you do not know how this person feels. You do not know their lives and, what they go through. So it feels like you cannot empathize with me.
Yeah, so you've experienced that when people say, I know someone from Poland.
Right.
Yeah, okay, not a good thing. I was going to ask you if you're willing to do this and can think off the top of your head, your top 10 typically insensitive but well-meaning remarks, if you can think of 10. I'd just like you to play ping pong with each other.
Well, and one that comes to my mind is I don't see color, or I'm colorblind.
Oh, really?
Again, well-intentioned. I'm not racist. I treat everyone equally, but not saying that. That means, well, you don't really acknowledge the implied differences in our society based on social identity.
The person on the other side is likely to be a little angry at that, or just feel dismissed or something.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another one might be, oh, you're so articulate, or you don't really seem like you are X type of person, or, you're so different than the other people like you that I've met. I mean, that can also be very dismissive and, implies certain stereotypes about that might go along with that particular group.
When this happens to you, I assume things like this have happened in your life. Do you get angry, or do you go, "Oh, poor thing, just misspoke"?
Maybe both. I mean, it depends on the
Yeah.
situation and who's saying it, you
Yes.
know, and why, and my relationship with them, and that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you guys keep going with the number 5 on the top 10 list?
Another one I can think of is hate the sin, love the sinner, as terms of maybe talking about LGBT people,
Gay and lesbian.
lesbian, transgender, right?
Okay,
so it's just like, okay, I accept you, but I don't accept your action, or whatever gay people do in their bedroom is their business. Again, it's implication that the gay relationship or lesbian relationship is only based on sexuality and doesn't have any depth to it.
You know, one came to me, she said that you people. You ever heard you people? Well, you
Yes.
people.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times things that can be offensive are when there's sort of subtleties in language that are excluding other people, and that's sort of what you people does. It's not inclusive language. It's you're different than me. You're an outsider, perhaps. There's some distance between the two of us. And I think when we talk about issues of race, I think it's just important to acknowledge that. If we live in sort of a generally, you think about quote unquote American culture, people of color need to know what white culture is like, the ways of white people, those kinds of things. And when you're in the majority, or you're in the majority culture, you can pick and choose when you want to step into the world of someone that is of color or of a sexual minority or some other status that isn't of your own. And so I think that you people, it kind of goes with that sense of you're different, we're not the same.
Okay. Have you exhausted your favorites? Have you got another one for us?
I
don't mean to be dismissive about it, but...
No, I'm okay, unless you can think of some, Monika.
Yeah, I think we
Okay.
we said our top 5.
Yeah.
If someone says to you, Monika, where are you from? How does that feel?
Again, I think it depends on the situation and who's saying it and how curious or interested they are in me. Clearly, whenever I say hello, people know I'm not from here. I do have an accent. And sometimes it comes in the first few seconds, sometimes it comes a little bit later. Actually, I do not mind it if it's really said with genuine approach. However, I think that what happens a lot is people say that to, let's say, people of Asian descent or ethnicity who are born in America, right? So they say, where are you from? And they said, I'm from Chicago. They're like, no, wait, where are you really from? Implying that they must be from somewhere else.
They're
So
not
it
really
creates that identity of feeling alien in their own land.
Okay, so if you're talking to someone who is Asian, can you, without putting your foot in your mouth, say, well, which country? Are you Chinese? Are you Japanese? Are you Korean? How's that?
Well, I think there's a difference between nationality and ethnicity, and I think that's kind of what you're getting at. So by asking what country are you from, that's when someone might say the United States.
Right.
But you're really wondering about their ethnic background. So I think maybe a better question would be, what's your ethnicity? Or can you tell me about your ethnic heritage? Something like that.
No, I'm learning something. If the person says, if you know they were born here, can you say, well, where'd your parents or grandparents, what country did they grow up in? Is that a rude question?
I think that, again, they might also grow up here, right? It might be generational. So
okay.
I think, as Amanda said, the better question is like, what's your ethnic background or heritage?
An ethnic might say Chinese or Japanese. That's ethnic. Isn't that country?
Japan or China would be the country.
Right.
Yeah. So your ethnicity would be, that goes along with that particular, it's like a cultural group within that country.
God, I feel so dumb. Is Japanese an ethnicity? Oh, okay.
So Japan, I think it's an ethnicity. Now there might be other like subcultures within the Japanese culture, but
ethnicity and a nationality, right?
Yeah.
You can also be from Japan and be Japanese, but also be Japanese as far as your ethnicity, as far as your background.
You know, it sounds very easy to say something that makes the other person uncomfortable or hurt or not liking you. Almost like maybe you're better off not touching almost anything and pretending the person in your own mind is just like you and not dealing with ethnicity, color, minority status.
Actually, no.
Yeah, I disagree, because that kind of touches on what Monika was saying earlier about, oh, I don't see color. We're all from the human race, that kind of thing. You know, I think it is important to acknowledge that there's a difference. But I think approaching someone that seems different from you, I mean, I think there's just some common sense ways of like being open, asking questions, trying to check your assumptions about things. You know, the way that you might talk to anyone else, it might be very similar.
Okay, so
but you might want to ask questions related to their identity.
You're at some function, some party, some gathering, and you're talking to someone you don't know. Well, you've been talking to them for 10 minutes, and they are, let us say, African American. You want to connect.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say anything about issues around being black? Can you say, you know, I'm involved in reducing the black population in prisons? It's disproportionate. Or would that be a signal, oh, you're talking about race because I'm black?
It could be, but it might also be a way to connect with someone. I guess what I would recommend is just being transparent. Like, oh, I'm, you know, we're here at this party. This is what, you know, I'm talking about myself, or I'm interested in this view, or I'm curious about that. What do you think about this? You know, just kind of being transparent about your feelings or why you're asking or why you're interested in a particular topic, just as you would with anyone else. Now, some topics might be hot button topics, you know, and somebody might be offended by what you're asking, or they may wonder why you're bringing this up with them. Is it because I'm black? And maybe it is, but maybe that's something that you can just own up to. Like,
well, could you say, hey, I know you're black, and I hope this doesn't sound bad, but I've always wanted to talk about a subject, and I'm thinking you might have more interest in your average person. What about this social injustice of incarceration or profiling? Bad thing to do?
Well, if you did that to me at a party, I might be like, why are you asking me about this?
Because you're black, and I figured you'd know something more than the average person or be more interested. Wrong assumption, right?
It might be a wrong assumption. I may not know any more about it than anyone else, and I might think like, oh, are you trying to argue with me, or are you genuinely curious? Like, oh, what do you know about it? And then maybe it might be an opportunity for you to share your knowledge about a particular topic. Are you interested in what I think about it? Or, I mean, I think there's ways to approach it positively, but it could be a hot button depending on how someone asks and what they're trying to get at.
This is so interesting that there's two questions that passed me by and I want to go back to. A waiter or waitress is waiting on you in a restaurant and they have an accent.
Mm-hmm.
How many times have I heard people say, oh, where are you from, honey? Or something, you know, or an older person might use that. I wouldn't use that honey thing, but is that trouble? Should you just let it go if the person has an accent and you don't know them?
It's a good question. I think it all depends, right? There's no cut and dry answers.
Well, okay,
that's what
but
we're getting here. But
we're at Applebee's and there's our waitress and she
Sure.
sounds like you.
Personally, I'm not sure. I don't mind it. I wouldn't mind that. However, if there will be a 10th person today that is asking me that question, I might feel a little annoyed. So maybe what we're coming, around to also talking about this concept, what we call pile-on principle, which is, let's say I wake up and, I go to work and somebody, ask me where am I from, right? Or maybe challenges if I'm here, if I'm a documented or undocumented immigrant. And then I go, along my live and something else happens to me that is offensive.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that I'm a Latina woman, right? And somebody questions my employment because of fulfilling the quota. So things like that happens to people of color and minorities on a daily basis, and they may just feel like, oh my gosh, this is another 10th time, this month, this year, this decade that it's happening to me. And that is what I think comes to just being sensitive and stressful and feeling like maybe that one time when people ask me where am I from, that was okay, but maybe not today.
It's not.
Right.
What if they say, your accent is beautiful? That's the first thing they say about your accent.
Oh, I like that.
Do you? Your accent is pretty, Monica.
Well, thank you. See, I don't think so.
I've never told you that. I didn't know if it's appropriate or not, and you work in the same place I do, but I do think it's pretty.
Yeah. And I think it also depends on how you say it about the relationship. If it really depends about a lot of things. So the bottom line is we all make mistakes. It's Amanda and I, we talk about it all the time, what happened to us, and we're learning. So it's not about not making a mistake, but checking in your assumptions, checking with another person how it felt, being open to, acknowledging that you're not perfect, and letting other people engage in a conversation with you. So the more aware you are about what your assumptions, biases, even if you're saying something that maybe, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have said that, but then you're learning, and the next time, okay, I have to be more careful about it.
Well, if I'm talking to, let's say, a black 45-year-old man at a cocktail party, I am curious about things that run in my mind. I wonder if you've ever been profiled when he's at Target, and people have watched him to see if he's shoplifting, or all these things I've heard, but I know I don't know the man well enough to say that, but it is in my mind. What do you do with that?
Well, I think it can be kind of a personal thing.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're sort of acknowledging that. I mean, perhaps the more you talk, the closer you become over the course of the evening, maybe it would be appropriate to ask. Maybe that wouldn't be the best first question to ask somebody, but maybe over time, if you're gauging what kinds of things you're talking about.
You mentioned Latino. Is it Hispanic or Latino?
Yeah, that's another good question, Dick. Hispanic refers historically to any region that was conquered by Spaniards. And this includes Spain, Central America. Latino is similar, but it encompasses any country in Latin America as well, including Brazil. So, where Spanish and Portuguese is spoken. I think today is interchangeable. Some people, in our political United States, we do have Hispanic on a census or as more like a bracket for ethnicity. But that's the historical kind of background.
Okay, but I don't know what to do with that. I mean, if I'm talking to someone who looks to me, and this is terrible, they might be from Mexico or whatever, they look brown. Is that, I don't know if that's okay to say, but they look Latino, Hispanic, whatever. How do you know which word to use if it comes up in the conversation?
I think Latino is an umbrella term.
It is.
And I think it implies somebody from Latin America, a person from Latin America with that heritage.
Okay.
Hispanic is more about the heritage from Europe, so more of a white identity. So some people will pick and choose the identity that fits for them most. So again, there isn't like a right or wrong.
So if you're meeting someone who's from Spain,
they might identify as Hispanic.
And someone from Brazil, Latino. And if you don't know, use Latino.
You could start there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that you're kind of getting at with the terms is there are reasons why people identify with one term other than another. And so having some knowledge of why someone would choose one term over another, it is important, because you may not get the term right off the bat because you can't just look at someone and know exactly how they're going to identify. But if you have some idea about why someone might choose Hispanic over Chicano versus Latino or African American or Black, you may understand why they would say, like, oh, actually, I identify as Black.
Now, you mentioned Chicano. Where does that fit in? We got Latino and Hispanic.
My understanding is that it's folks that are Mexican American, and it has like a little bit more of a political connotation than maybe just Mexican American. So there's just reasons why people may pick one term over another.
Well, that is informative, and I'm glad you're telling us. But that's for people listening going to be hard because the rule isn't clear. How
the
about,
rules are not clear. That's maybe what's difficult.
Well, we got a few. You don't say my best friend is from Poland or I'm Jewish or Black. You don't say that. But getting to Black and African American, Now, this is a biggie that I'm sure a lot of people struggle with. And my sense is African American is what you're supposed to be saying, not black. But is that right?
Well, it is an umbrella term, and I think it gets at someone's ethnicity, being like their ethnic background is African and they're American. However, not everyone is of African descent. I mean, someone might have been from the Caribbean, or
Right.
they might not be American. They might just be an immigrant from Africa. So it isn't like it isn't an end-all, be-all term.
Well, let's
but-
say Colin Powell.
Okay.
Colin Powell is from the islands, the Caribbean, I believe.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Would he be then a black man, not an African American man?
He could be either. I don't know how he identifies, but I'm sure he could go by either term. I mean, I identify, in my growing up, I identified as black, but not African American for a long time because I felt like I couldn't identify with some of the cultural aspects of being African American. So to me, black was a more fitting term. That changed over time for me. So, it wouldn't be wrong to say black. It wouldn't be wrong to say African American now. It's kind of a personal thing. I think if you wanted to call someone African American, again, it's a place to start. They may correct you. They may identify in a different way, but you sort of have to start somewhere.
Wouldn't you be better off? Let's say you're talking to a person who's African American, and you're saying, "Well, I'm met a person who was black, or I met a person who was African American." If you have to, for some reason, bring that into the conversation, isn't it a safer bet to say African American?
I usually say African American.
Okay.
I usually do start there.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm not offended if someone says black.
But some African Americans might be.
They might be.
Okay. Well, so what I'm hearing from the takeaway there is, if you're a white person and you're trying to stay not offensive, use African American first if you have to choose.
Yeah, I think that's a safe bet. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's very helpful. Let's talk about, we were talking about Asians before. And we're talking about you should ask your nationality, not your heritage. Is there, or not where you're from, like that and all. Any other suggestions when you're talking to people from Asia or from different hemispheres, countries, that avoids you getting into an offensive area? But let's take Asians as a start. Have we covered that ground pretty well?
Yeah, I would say don't say like, "Oh, your English is so good." I wouldn't say that because there's countries in Asia where English is a first language.
That's a good one.
So that's maybe something to avoid.
Okay.
But that's not what you asked.
Well, no, that's good. That's helpful. Don't say that.
Or don't say, oh, are you Chinese, Korean, or what? Don't say that.
Okay. Now, you teach this course at the university. If you were running workshops for people who were in business or out managing or whatever, would there be anything different in a way you'd be approaching the subject with them so that they're going to get more information and skills than what you're giving to us today?
I think many things would be similar, maybe some different. I think the big part of what we're talking about is to increase our self-awareness. The blind spots that we have, the assumptions that we have, the stereotypes that we have that we may not be aware of is sometimes what gets us in trouble. Mm-hmm. The more we know about this, the more we can accept it and look at this, then we have bigger choices on how to approach other people.
Well-educated college grad people, do they have prejudices?
Of course.
Yes.
We all do.
Everyone does.
We may not be fully aware of that, but we all do. It's hard not to.
Really? Mm-hmm. What are some of the typical prejudices that you think exist toward, let's pick some minorities, toward, I already forgot, which is the broader term, Latinos or Hispanics?
You could say either one.
Either one, okay, Latinos. What are a person with a PhD in chemistry might be, no, there's a well-educated person, but they're not.
I really think it would be an impossible question to answer because it's such an individual thing. I mean, based on family values, messages growing up, maybe interactions with individuals, somebody would come up with their own sort of like rubric of possible stereotypes, watching any TV show, watching commercials. I mean, we're all exposed to these things. It's just in the fabric of the world. So someone who's maybe in a particular field where they're like psychology or social work, where they're it's required that they understand themselves and understand some of their blind spots a little bit more. They may have differing views, or they may have been examined so that they can interact with folks in a different kind of way. But probably people have very similar, everybody's aware of stereotypes that go with certain groups. I mean, it's just a part of our culture and living in the United States.
What I'm hearing there is, if you really want to get an A in being culturally sensitive, get to know yourself in depth about your prejudices that you might not know are there. Am I hearing that right?
Yes. I think that's a good way to approach it. I think that people in majority culture, white people, have this privilege, and we can talk a little bit about that, what we call white privilege, and that's not something that it's earned, or it doesn't dismiss any hard working that they put into where they are, but it's because they were born in certain group and certain characteristics that come with certain privileges in the society.
Sure.
Even though, and we can have both, privilege and more minority social identities. For example, I identify as, white and heterosexual. That's my privilege. But I'm also an immigrant, and maybe that comes from more minority perspective. However, I am documented immigrant, so that also comes with certain amount of privileges, right? But as a white person, I don't have to think about it day to day, right? I can go to the store and not be followed and feel that, I'm being watched because I might shoplift. I might access healthcare maybe easier. I can, go to the store and pick a Band-Aid that it's my skin color. So those little things that maybe people of color or other minorities think about it on a daily basis, I don't have to.
So really, the more you learn about the life of a person who's of a different culture than you, the more you understand, the more you can empathize, the more you might see what your distortions are coming from the privileged class.
And really, research has shown, like, we can all fake cultural competence. We can all say the right words and ask the right questions, but it doesn't mean that we understand or that we are doing a good job. I think having a genuine, authentic, real relationship with someone that's different than you is what's going to increase your learning and your understanding about yourself and that person. So it's not forced, or somebody's not like your subject to be learned from. You're in a relationship with that person, and through that you learn about their ways or their beliefs or their world views and things like that, and they can learn about yours.
Can you also learn from books and movies? Like, I was at a lecture last night on the experience of someone coming out of prison, how hard it is to get a job and all the obstacles and stuff, and I kind of knew that, but when you get more information, you get more empathy. So does it have to be you have a friend who is, or can you get it other ways?
I think you can get it on other ways, but I don't know if that personal interaction can be, replicated from books. But certainly you can get knowledge from books, yeah.
I think it's a good way to start. To start maybe reading, educating yourself, watching those movies, reading those articles. It's definitely a good place to start, and then you can move it forward.
And while we're there and as we close, is there any particular books, movies, courses, anything you'd recommend to people, sites on the internet, if they think, I want to become more culturally sensitive to what other people are experiencing?
One good book that we like to use, it's called 35 Dumb Things That Well-Intended People Say.
35 Dumb Things.
35 Dumb Things, yes. There's this great article by Peggy McIntosh about white privilege.
It's called Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack.
Oh, okay. That's 35 dumb things white people say?
Well-intended.
Well-intended, okay.
People say.
By the way, are minorities as guilty as white people when they're talking to other minorities of saying something insensitive?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah. Well, with that, I'd like to thank you both for joining us, and I hope you'll join us on the next edition of Insights.